Unless you've been living under a rock somewhere, you surely know that our nation is in great peril, tremendous danger. In fact, a lot of experts have recently said that we are at risk of a terror attack here in the United States, a higher level of risk than has existed since back 9/11/2001. So we're at the highest level of risk in over 20 years that there might be a terror attack here in the United States. Of course, we know that there are wars on multiple fronts around the world, and unfortunately, we are involved in some of that military fighting that's going on. There's just a lot of threats and a lot of danger to our country. In fact, we could just put it this way. There are a lot of bad people out there who have an agenda, and they would really like to harm us if they possibly could, and they're going to try to do that whenever they can. Now, with that understood, and again, I don't think there's anybody here who'd be willing to argue that those observations. With that being the case, what should we do to ensure our national security? How can we secure our nation's future? Well, there might be several suggestions that people would offer. Someone says what we really need is more spending on our military. We need to build up our Army and our Navy and our Air Force. We need to hire more soldiers. We need to put more equipment in the field. We just need to spend more on our military. We haven't been spending as much lately, and maybe we need to spend more. That's the argument that is posed. I don't know about that. I'm not an expert in those kind of things at all, and I couldn't tell you one way or the other, but that may, in fact, be helpful. Possibly. We spend a lot of money already, maybe spend more, I don't know. Someone else says what we really need to do is that we need to engage in greater diplomatic efforts. We need to send our diplomats all over the world. We already do that, obviously, but do more of that. Send negotiators, send people out to try and, calm down all of the tensions, sort of put oil on the water, make it calmer, see if we can't resolve some of our issues just by talking them through. Well, I'll tell you, I am all for that. If we can solve the problems by talking rather than fighting, I'd be for that for sure, wouldn't you? That might be helpful. I don't know. I'm not an expert on those things. That might be helpful. Someone else says what we really need to do is we need to invest heavily in high-tech sort of things. It's pretty incredible how technology has advanced even within the last few recent years, and maybe what we need to do, they can pilot a drone on the other side of the world from over here, and maybe we need more of that kind of high-tech stuff. Maybe cyber security, get people involved in protecting our essential infrastructure, computers, and so forth. I'm going to say again, maybe, possibly, that might be helpful. I don't know if I would argue one way or the other. But I'm going to tell you, all of those things that we just mentioned, and maybe more that you could think of, those are not the real answer to securing our nation's future. Those are not the answer. The Bible has the answer to our real national security and how we can secure the future of our nation. And for a few minutes tonight, what we'd like to do is talk about some biblical principles in regards to how we could make certain that our nation is in the best possible condition. The Bible has the answer to those things. We stopped briefly here to just thank you all for being present on Sunday evening. Man, what a hot day in Alabama. But you expect that this time of year. And some of us were mentioning beforehand, we're just grateful for air conditioning and that we are able to meet together in relative comfort. I was mentioning to Sister Henson earlier, if this was not that many years ago, all of the windows would be up and people would be fanning like crazy. Flies would be all over us, and it would be pure misery. How blessed we are that we have a comfortable place like this in which to assemble. Thanks for being here. Thanks for being here to be a part of this and for the encouragement that you are to all the rest of us. Let's talk about national security. I want to start with some fundamental truths that are taught in the Scripture. And the first of those is that God is in control. God rules over the affairs of nations. In the Old Testament times, back in Daniel chapter 2, the famous prophet Daniel said to the mega powerful King Nebuchadnezzar, Daniel said, He, God, changeth the times and seasons. He, God, removeth kings and setteth up kings. He giveth wisdom to the wise and knowledge to them that know understanding. Here's Nebuchadnezzar, who was at that moment the strongest, most powerful ruler in the world. And Daniel reminded him, you need to know that God is in control. In chapter 4, verse 17, Daniel said, the Most High ruleth in the kingdom of men, and giveth it to whomsoever he will. That was true way back then, nearly 3,000 years ago, and it's still true today. In Psalm 22, verse 28, it says he rules over the nations. Revelation chapter 1, verse 5 says he is the ruler of the kings of the earth. Revelation 19, verse 16 says he is King of kings and Lord of lords. And so our first observation when it comes to the future of our nation or any nation in that for that matter is to remember, always remember, God is in control. And he will do as he wills. We need to remember that. Now, with that basis, add this thought. When the wickedness of a people reaches a certain level, God always has, and there's no reason to think that he won't in the future, he will terminate the prosperity of such nations. He always has. Whenever a nation became so wicked, God would cut them off. And there's an anticipation that that would happen as well in the future. I want to do a little historical review with you, and I don't want to weary you with this, but I do want you to observe how often this has happened. God would tolerate a nation and its existence until that nation became so wicked and evil and corrupt, he would tolerate them no more. Let me start out with you concerning Babylon. We just mentioned a minute ago the great King Nebuchadnezzar. Of course, he was king over Babylon. Babylon was enormously strong and powerful in its heyday. The ancient historian Herodotus said that the walls of the ancient city of Babylon were 300 feet tall and 75 feet thick. I want to tell you, that almost seems hard to believe, doesn't it? I don't know if that is 100% accurate or not. But at the very least, Babylon was incredibly strong and powerful. And yet Isaiah said, and I want you to remember, Isaiah said this 150 years before it happened. Isaiah said, behold, I will stir up the Medes against them, and Babylon, the glory of kingdoms, the beauty of the Chaldees, excellency, shall be as when God overthrew Sodom and Gomorrah. So when Babylon was at its zenith of power, Isaiah said, God's going to bring a judgment against Babylon. And he did. And Babylon fell. But that's just one example. The Bible is full of such examples. Let me take you to Psalm 137, verse 7. And this is talking about the Edomites. Now, do you remember from your Old Testament history that the Edomites were the descendants of Esau? Jacob and Esau. Of course, Jacob became father of the nation of Israel. Esau became the patriarch, the father of the Edomites. And when enemies had invaded Judah, the Edomites rejoiced. Psalm 137, verse 7, remember, O Lord, the children of Edom in the day of Jerusalem, who said, raise it, even to the foundation of thereof. So the Edomites rejoiced when enemies prevailed over Jerusalem. They thought that they were safe. They thought that no invading army could ever trouble them. Their capital city was the fortress city of Petra, and Petra sat upon a granite ridge that ran 2,000 feet above the plain which surrounded it. And so they thought that they were safe. Nobody could ever attack or prevail against them. But Obadiah said, Obadiah 1, beginning verse 3, the pride of the heart, the pride of thine heart hath deceived thee, thou that dwellest in the clefts of the rock, whose habitation is high, that saith in his heart, who shall bring me down to the ground? Though thou exalt thyself as the eagle, and though thou set thy nest among the stars, thence I will bring thee down, saith the Lord. And he did. God brought down the Edomites. They didn't think anybody could ever overcome them. But God said it would happen. Obadiah prophesied it, and it came to pass. Another example, God rules over the affairs of nations. He will not let evil nations prevail. Let me take you back, way, way back in Old Testament history. Go back to Genesis chapter 15. In Genesis chapter 15, we know that some of the promises that God made to Abraham is that his descendants would occupy Canaan land. That was part of the threefold promise to Abraham. But notice that God said that that promise wasn't going to be fulfilled yet. Genesis 15, verse 15, thou shalt go to thy fathers in peace, thou shalt be buried in a good old age. In the fourth generation thy seed shall come hither again. Notice, for the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet full. Pay special attention to that last phrase. So the Amorites were the people who occupied Canaan land at that time. God said, in a coming day, your descendants will come back here and they will occupy this land, but not yet. He says it'll be 4 generations away. In the 4th generation, thy seed shall come hither again. Why? Why wait, God? Why don't we do it now? He said, for the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet full. So note from that God was aware of what was going on among the Amorite tribes. He foreknew their moral character. And, of course, we understand that he reacts to the moral conduct of nations. Again, the principle is nations are spared until they reach a level of corruption that God will no longer tolerate, and then they are cut off. That's the biblical principle. Real quickly, a couple more examples. Sodom and Gomorrah. We know that one well, right? Sodom and Gomorrah. Genesis 18, verse 20. The Lord said, the cry of Sodom and Gomorrah is great. Their sin is very grievous. Again, God knew. God was aware of what was going on in Sodom and Gomorrah. Do you remember in this episode, Abraham tried to negotiate with him? And I think he started out with 50 people. But God, what if you could find 50 righteous people in Sodom? God said, well, I'd spare the city for 50 righteous people. I've always been amazed that Abraham proceeded to negotiate with God. And he got him down finally to 10. What if there were just 10 righteous people in Sodom? And God said, I'd spare the city for 10 righteous, but basically, so I'm done talking about that now. Of course, 10 righteous people couldn't be found. And we know, of course, the tremendous destruction that God sent upon Sodom and Gomorrah. Here's another. Book of Jonah. Jonah, you remember, was sent to Nineveh. Nineveh was the great world power before Babylon was. So before Nebuchadnezzar and Babylon were the great world powers, the Assyrian Empire was the big bully on the block. Nineveh was the capital of the Assyrian Empire. The Assyrians were incredibly, very wicked and horribly bloody and oppressive against the people that they defeated. If you ever want to read some really gory stuff, research a little bit about how the Assyrians treated the people that they conquered. It was horrible. They were a very evil and wicked nation. But God sent Jonah to Nineveh. Remember, Jonah didn't want to go to Nineveh, basically because he didn't want Nineveh to repent. He wanted God to punish them. Jonah 1 verse 2, arise, go to Nineveh, that great city, and cry against it, for their wickedness has come up before me. God knew. He was aware of how wicked Nineveh was. Again, as I said, Jonah didn't want to go, not because he was personally afraid. He didn't want to go because he didn't want the Ninevites to repent. He wanted God to punish them. But you know the story of Jonah. He finally went. He preached them, and they repented. And so God spared them for a time because they repented at the preaching of Jonah. But they didn't stay that way, and they went back to their wickedness. In Nahum chapter 1, verse 1, the burden of Nineveh, with an overrunning flood, he will make an utter end of the place thereof. And he did. And the Assyrian Empire fell. Are you beginning to see a pattern here? Doesn't it look like there's a repeat of history again and again and again? Again, remember the principle that we're setting forth. God spares nations until they are so wicked, he won't tolerate them anymore, and he brings them down. Of course, one more, and this actually is the one we know the most about, and that is the Jewish nation. The Israelites just repeatedly became unfaithful to God over and over and over again. All through the Old Testament, we read that history. And it was happening again in the first century. It was happening when Jesus came to earth to live and die among men. Their repeated episodes of unfaithfulness to God was capped by their rejection of Jesus as his only begotten Son. And in Matthew chapter 24, Jesus foretold the final, ultimate destruction of the Jewish nation. Matthew 24, verse 1, Jesus went out and departed from the temple, and his disciples came to him for to show him the buildings of the temple. And Jesus said unto them, See ye not all these things? Verily I say unto you, there shall not be left here one stone upon another that shall not be thrown down. And that happened. The Roman armies besieged and ultimately took the city of Jerusalem in 70 AD. Interesting, in a literal fulfillment of what Jesus predicted, historical accounts say that the Roman soldiers went through, especially the temple site, and literally turned every stone over, thinking that they might find some little bit of gold or silver, some scrap there that they could salvage that would be precious or valuable. And they fulfilled Jesus' prophecy to the letter. The Jewish state fell and has never been restored in that sense. So, do you see some history taking place here? Do you see that God has, through time, dealt with nations? He's in control of the nations. He rules over the affairs of nations. And he will only tolerate a people until their wickedness reaches such a level he won't put up with it anymore and they are brought low. Okay, with that understanding then, let's ask this question. What will happen to our country? What do you think the future holds for our country? Well, we have all this history, right? We all have all this track record of how God has dealt with nations, and all of that is there for us to learn from. In 1 Corinthians chapter 10, beginning verse 11, now all these things happen to them for examples, and they're written for our admonition, upon whom the ends of the world are come. Wherefore let him that thinketh he standeth take heed lest he fall. Let him that thinketh he standeth take heed lest he fall. Could that be us? We think we're so powerful. We think we're in such a great spot. No one could ever prevail against us. Our nation would never be brought down or defeated. That's sort of been the mindset in America for a long time, but with the history that we've just read from the Word of God, that seems to be sort of a iffy proposition. Someone says, hang on a minute, preacher. Now you wait there just for a minute, preacher. Are you trying to suggest that we are as bad as some of those people that you were just describing? For instance, are you trying to suggest that we are as bad as the Amorites were in the land of Canaan before the Israelites drove them out? Are you saying, surely you're not suggesting, preacher, that we're as bad as they were? You know one of the things that some of those Amorite people did? They worshiped the pagan god Molech, and they offered their living babies as sacrifice to Molech. We're told that they would heat up that molten image, and then they would place living babies in the arms of Molech and offer them as burnt sacrifices to that idol god. Now, hang on here, preacher. You're not suggesting that we're as bad as those Amorites were when they worshiped their god Molech. Well, are we? You know how many abortions have been performed in the United States since 1973? In the last 50 years, do you know how many babies have been aborted in the United States? It's rapidly approaching 65 million. Get that? 65 million babies have been aborted. You think we're not as bad as those pagan Amorites? If you want to get a little perspective on that number, nearly 65 million babies killed by abortion in the last 50 years in America. Do you know how many soldiers have died fighting for the United States, going all the way back to the Revolutionary War, World War I, World War II, every military engagement that we've had since we became a nation? Do you know how many American soldiers have died? 1.5 million. Now that seems like a lot, and it is a lot, and that's a great price to pay for freedom. But that number pales in comparison to how many babies have been killed by abortion. You think we're not as bad as the Amorites were? Someone says, now, certainly, preacher, you don't mean to suggest that we're as bad as Sodom and Gomorrah, do you? Surely you don't think we're as bad as Sodom and Gomorrah. Well, I think you know the answer to that. Dating back just a few years when the Supreme Court ruled that same-sex marriage was legal in all 50 states of the Union, and the incredible increase in homosexuality that is occurring all around us, you think we're not as bad as Sodom and Gomorrah? Now, if you think God won't act in regards to those kinds of things, I think you're mistaken. You know, Malachi chapter 3, verse 6 says, I am the Lord, I change not. If God dealt with those nations the way that he did, why wouldn't he deal with this nation that way? He doesn't change. His moral character does not change. I want to suggest to you that the future for our country is very bleak, incredibly dangerous and sad. What will our future be? What will happen to our country? Well, I'm not a prophet, and I'm not predicting, but I do like to study history. And history is pretty plain in this regard. Well, I don't want to stop there. If we drew the lesson to a close right there, that's a pretty dark story, isn't it? A pretty gloomy thing to describe. But let's talk on a more positive note for a minute. What can we do? And I think there are some Bible answers to what we might be able to do to help secure our nation's future. I'll tell you, the future of our nation doesn't look really bright right now. But there's some things that we could do that might turn that tide and change that outcome, at least for a time. The things I want to suggest to you are based upon two Bible verses. In Proverbs 14, verse 34, it says, righteousness exalteth a nation, but sin is a reproach to any people. Righteousness, that's the answer, right? A turn in a more righteous path. That's what has to happen. If our nation is going to survive, the nation has to turn in a more righteous path. That's just absolutely true. Psalm 9 verse 17 says, the wicked shall be turned into hell, and all the nations that forget God. If our nation continues to forget God, and it's very badly headed in that direction, things will not go well. We've got to change that. We've got to do whatever is in our power to make those critical changes. What can we do then? Well, let me suggest to you, first of all, prayer. Prayer is a powerful tool, and we need to use prayer. We need to pray about all so many different kind of things, but specifically relative to our lesson tonight, I want to suggest to you that we need to pray for our nation. In 1 Timothy chapter 2, beginning verse 1, Paul says, I exhort, therefore, that first of all, supplications, prayers, intercessions, and givings of thanks be made for all men, for kings and for all that are in authority, that we may lead a quiet and peaceable life in all godliness and honesty. Pray. We're to pray. We're especially to pray specifically for our leaders. Do you do that? As you approach God in prayer on a regular daily basis, do you include prayers for our nation? We ought to do that. Paul here is actually instructing us to do that. And certainly prayer is powerful and helpful, and we need to be praying. Every day, pray. If you've not been doing that, let me challenge you to begin at once to pray constantly every day for the future of our nation. Specifically, that our leaders will turn us in a more righteous path, because that's the only answer to our future security. Pray for our country and its leaders that we turn in a more righteous path. Secondly, let me suggest to you that we need to maintain personal godliness. Personal godliness. Every one of us, each of us as children of God, we need to be living personally pure, moral lives. I'll tell you, we hear a lot of stuff. Even among Christians, we see and hear things that would have been unimaginable even a few years ago. The world is attacking God's people, and unfortunately, the world is infecting so many of God's people that we're not standing out as shining lights like we should. You remember Jesus' famous words in Matthew chapter 5, verse 16, let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify your Father which is in heaven. When the people of the world around us see us living godly lives, that's an influence for good. That may very well influence them to live more godly lives. And so each of us, living personally godly lives is so important. In Philippians chapter 2, verse 15, be blameless and harmless, the sons of God without rebuke in the midst of a crooked and perverse nation, among whom you shine as lights in this world. What do you do when you live? Notice that what Paul said. What do you do when you're living in the midst of a crooked and perverse nation? Well, that's us, right? We're living in the midst of a crooked and perverse nation. What do you do when you're in that condition? You shine as lights in the world. And so that's upon us, right? That's upon us to be living right, doing right, setting a wonderful example, trying to be lights in the community around us, trying to influence the people who know us to do right. That's us. We need to be living personally godly lives. I want to also suggest to you that you need to guard your family. And this is particularly pertinent to those who are parents, still have children living at home. But I want to suggest to you it's also pertinent to us who are grandparents and the influence that we can have not only on our children, but also on our grandchildren. Guard your family. Edward Gibbons wrote a famous 6-volume set back in the 1700s. Gibbons wrote about the decline and fall of the Roman Empire. By the way, there's another great world power that God brought down, the Roman Empire. And Gibbon wrote about the decline and fall of the Roman Empire. You know what one of the contributing factors that he outlined was? He spoke about the collapse of the family unit. That was true back then, and it will be true today. The family unit in America is in bad shape, I think you will agree. Family units are actually, truthfully, the backbone of any nation. And your family and my family can be a saving influence in our nation, but we've got to guard and protect our own families. You remember the famous statement of Joshua in Joshua 24, verse 15? If it seem evil unto you to serve the Lord, choose you this day whom you will serve, whether the gods which your fathers served that were on the other side of the flood, or the gods of the Amorites in whose land you dwell. But as for me and my family, as for me and my house, rather, we will serve the Lord. For all of you men in particular who are heads of your families, can you say that with that same determination, absolute commitment? As for me and my house. Now, I don't know what everybody else is going to do. The world is heading in a bad way. Our country is in a terrible shape. I don't know what everybody else is going to do, but I'll tell you how it's going to be at my house. As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. Right? Can we make that kind of statement? You men in particular who are leaders of your families, can you make that kind of strong commitment? Protect your families. It is so important. And then let me suggest to you that we need to speak out and declare God's truth. We need to speak out and declare God's truth against all the evils that are plaguing our nation and our culture. There's so many things wrong. I want to tell you, there's just so many terrible things wrong. But let me go back, and I'm not saying that these are necessarily the only issues. They're not the only issues, but let me go back to the two issues that I mentioned earlier, abortion and homosexuality. Now, please don't leave and say the preacher said those are the only two things wrong in America. That's not. Those are not the only two things wrong in America. There's lots of things wrong in America. But I just want to address those two because I think they're so really important. Abortion. Can you speak up and speak out against abortion? One of the ways that we have power in our country is that we're granted a vote, right? We can vote. Would you like to go to Washington, D.C. and have a sit-down interview with President Biden? I would. Man, I got a number of things I'd like to talk to President Biden about. That's never going to happen, right? I'd like to go to Nashville, Tennessee and talk to our governor there. I got some things I'd like to say to him. I suspect you'd like to go down to Montgomery and speak to your governor, tell him a few things that ought to be done, but The chances of us ever having those kinds of opportunities is zero. That's just not going to happen. But we do have a vote. That's one way we can express our opinions about such things. We ought to use our vote. I'm going to say this, and I don't want to offend anybody, but I hope you'll take it in the way it's intended. But I'm going to tell you, if there's a candidate running for public office, I got 2 questions. These are just my first 2 questions. If you get these right, we can talk some more. If you get them wrong, I don't need to talk to you anymore. Number 1, where do you stand on abortion? Where do you stand upon our tax dollars funding abortion? If you're for abortion, I'm not voting for you. And I don't care if that candidate is running for president, for Senate, for Congress, a governor, state representative. I don't care if that candidate's running for dog catcher. If he won't tell me I'm against abortion, I will not use government funds to fund abortion, I'm not voting for that guy. And my second question is, where do you stand on same-sex marriage? And if that candidate will not say boldly that that's not right and I'm against it, then I'm not voting for those people, right? I have a vote. I can let my thinking be known at least through a vote. But that's just one way. And honestly, our votes have very minimal influence, but at least it's some influence. But there are other things that we can do right in our own immediate communities wherein we can speak up against such horrible, horrendous sins like abortion. A few years ago in Tennessee, we had a state constitutional amendment on the ballot, and it was in regards to abortion. And some of us who were members of the church got busy locally organizing an effort to get that measure passed in Tennessee, and we were successful. But there's all kinds of things like that we can do to let our voice be heard. And we need to do that. Speak out and declare God's truth. In Psalm 119, verse 46, the psalmist said, I will speak of thy testimonies also before kings, and will not be ashamed. I will not be ashamed. I am not going to be ashamed to declare what God teaches us in regards to those horrible moral sins. So, what's the future of our nation? What will secure the future of our nation? Well, as I said before, the Bible has the real answer. And the only true security for our nation in the future is a turn toward God. We pray that will happen. But I got to tell you, I think another thing that we ought to be praying about, I'll just leave you with this. I think we need to be praying that as the people of God, that we're determined that we're going to be faithful to God no matter what happens. I think some particularly bad things could happen. The trend in our country is not good, and you know that. I think, for instance, that it might not be so distantly off in the future where they'll come at us for preaching against abortion and homosexuality. And they're going to label us as guilty of hate speech and potentially prosecute us and persecute us for taking a stand on God's truth. I'm concerned. Things could get bad. I think it could happen relatively quickly. We need to be praying that no matter what happens, we will be faithful to God. Sort of like the apostles that we studied about in our Bible class hour this morning. That, they were beaten and threatened, and they did not cease to speak and teach about Jesus. We need to have that same kind of determination. Thank you for listening. Again, as I said, I don't think it's a very pretty picture when we think about our country and the condition that we are in, but it is the reality. And I hope something that I said has been helpful tonight. This has not been the kind of lesson that teaches God's simple plan of salvation, or for that matter, even motivates people to respond to the invitation. But we wouldn't want to close an assembly without giving that opportunity. So if you're here tonight, if as a Christian you feel you need the prayers of the saints, we'd be glad to pray with you and for you. Or if you're here and desire to obey that simple gospel plan, hear, believe, repent, confess, and be baptized. If we can help you in any way, let us know while we stand and sing.